Hey everybody, welcome back to the video. I'm excited to talk about okay. So today we're talking about annoying game mechanics. There are many, they are vast, and they are constantly overused, and today we're going to talk about a bunch of those. So if you have one of your own that you find very annoying, let me know down below. I'd love to talk to you about it. Let's go ahead and get started with the first one. Limited inventory space can add tension by making players choose what items to keep, but it can also feel like a constant interruption. When done poorly, it turns into micromanagement that takes away from the fun. For example, in Skyrim, inventory space becomes a chore. The game's sprawling world is filled with loot, but your character's carrying capacity is limited. You constantly find yourself over-encumbered, slowing your movement to a crawl, forcing you to drop items or backtrack to sell or store loot. This mechanic interrupts exploration and immersion. On the other hand, Resident Evil 4 uses limited inventory space brilliantly. The game's attaché case system is a mini-puzzle, where you have to carefully arrange your weapons, ammo, and healing items. It forces players to prioritize creating tension without feeling like a nuance. It complements the survival horror genre, enhancing the feeling of scarcity and making every decision feel important. I picked Skyrim and Resident Evil 4 because I feel like they're both kind of on different ends of the spectrum when it comes to how inventory management can be done in video games. Skyrim, for example, gives you way too much, but also limits what you're allowed to carry. If you're going to put me in a big, vast, open world, and I'm some dragon-killing machine, like, superhero guy, and I'm limited on inventory space, and I can't carry enough, we're fighting dragons. Defeat the realism. Just let me pick up as much as I want, because now I'm having to determine, do I want to keep these flowers for alchemy, or do I want to keep these weapons that I'm going to sell for gold later, or what, it just gets so intense and just too much when it comes to inventory management. Whereas with Resident Evil, it is a survival horror game. It's meant to be scarce resources and limited space. You're only carrying what essentially is a briefcase with you. I don't know where he puts that. Anyways, the inventory system in Resident Evil 4 makes sense because it's supposed to be realistic. It's not giving you dragon fighting, dragon shouting magic spells. It's a guy shooting a gun at zombies, which, for realism, for what it's worth. But it makes sense for inventory management to be a thing in this game compared to Skyrim, where I feel like I should just be able to carry whatever I want. QuickTime events can be exciting when used sparingly to emphasize key moments, but they often fail when they're overused or disrupt the flow of gameplay. In The Walking Dead Season 1, QTEs are well executed. They're used in moments of high tension, such as fending off zombies, without overstaying their welcome. The timing of these QTEs allows the story to remain engaging while giving the player a sense of urgency during dangerous encounters. They enhance the drama and don't feel like mindless button mashing. However, God of War Ascension is an example of QTEs used poorly. Throughout the game, QTEs are frequent, repetitive, and often appear during cutscenes, breaking the immersion. Instead of focusing on combat or narrative, you're constantly distracted by on-screen button prompts that feel tacked on and unnecessary. The use of QTEs goes way back for me. I can remember early on Dragon's Lair is one the game's basically a huge QTE. You're just pushing buttons when prompted to throughout the entire game. But for me and my experience with QTEs, the one I remember the most is, of course, Shenmue. Shenmue used QTEs to kind of allow you to feel like the gameplay and the cutscenes were one. So sometimes you're watching a cutscene, but being able to press a button to do that kick or watch out for that thing made it feel a little more immersive. But I think that we've lost our way with QTEs, and now they're just kind of a thing that are thrown in to make sure that you continue feeling like you're playing. For me, recently, Final Fantasy 16 was that way, where I'm watching this huge, epic cutscene, and these things are battling, and it looks so cool, and then all of a sudden I have to just start mashing X just because the cutscene kind of gives you the idea that you need to. Two giant things are clashing. I need to be mashing X to push back. But at the end of the day, I'd rather just watch the cutscene if you're going to do that. I'm immersed enough. I enjoy theatric cutscenes, especially being a Final Fantasy fanboy. I enjoy theatric cutscenes, so I can just sit there and watch them. I don't feel like I need to hit a button to stay immersed. If anything, hitting buttons during times like that ruin the immersion for me.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 1 of Germacraft.
Crafting and base building systems can add depth and personalization to games, but when implemented poorly, they feel like tedious chores rather than enjoyable mechanics. No Man's Sky, for example, originally suffered from this. At launch, its crafting system felt like a repetitive grind. Players spent more time gathering resources for survival and basic ship repairs than exploring the vast universe the game promised. The constant need to craft fuel and resources hampered the freedom and excitement of exploration. In contrast, Subnautica integrates crafting beautifully. The game's focus on survival in an alien ocean makes the crafting system feel essential and rewarding. You gradually build more complex tools and bases, but the pacing ensures that resource gathering and crafting are balanced with exploration and progression. Crafting enhances the core gameplay rather than detracting from it. Alright, this one is one of my biggest dislikes when it comes to game mechanics. I strongly dislike that every game has to have crafting in it in some way. Crafting, base building, whatever it may be. Another example of a game that did that is Fallout 4, where crafting and base building kind of took over what is normally like a story-driven exploration game, because you always had to go back and get resources for your base, and that guy's always bothering you, and it kind of ruined the pace. So I feel like you can do it well. I think it's just one of those mechanics nowadays that's just shoehorned into every game, even if it's so small as like crafting items that you need. I mean, does every game need to have food crafting, item crafting, base building? I just don't feel, I'm getting frustrated. I've cut out a bunch of stuff. I just don't enjoy this mechanic at all, and I think it needs to go away. Just in general, I think, how do I say this? Fuck you, Minecraft.
And there she goes.
Item durability is often used to prevent players from relying on a single powerful item, but when done poorly, it becomes a constant annoyance. In The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the durability system is one of the most polarizing aspects of the game. Weapons break after just a few uses, forcing you to constantly find replacements. This mechanic interrupts combat and exploration, making players hesitant to use strong weapons for fear they're shattered too quickly. On the other hand, Dark Souls uses durability in a way that adds to the game's tension without overwhelming the player. Weapons degrade gradually and can be repaired at bonfires or with special items, but they don't break so quickly that it becomes a constant distraction. The system adds an extra layer of strategy to combat and exploration, but doesn't punish players unfairly. Breath of the Wild is, yes, it's, I would say, an almost perfect game, if not for the durability. The amount of weapons you go through just cracking stuff in like a couple of hits is just so frustrating. And there's other games that do it too. Go back to Bethesda games like Skyrim, Oblivion, Fallout, whatever it may be, and them all having durability and them all just seeming to run out in random ways. The amount of times in Oblivion that I've been playing on stream that I pick up a weapon and I use it and it just seems to just degrade so quickly, and next thing I know I've got my fists out because my weapon's broken, and it's just so frustrating. It's not as frustrating as the crafting thing, but it's pretty close to it. I understand realism, but again, if I'm playing The Legend of Zelda or I'm playing Skyrim or Oblivion, I don't want the realism in that way. Like I don't want that level of realism. Just let me hit stuff with a sword and not worry about it breaking. I mean, even the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild has charges. It's annoying and obnoxious, and I hate it. And whatever, let's move on to the next one.
I can only do it from my lab, so you're gonna have to escort me there. An escort mission? And you have a health bar?
Escort missions are universally disliked because they often involve poor AI or overly vulnerable characters. However, when done right, they can create meaningful emotional stakes. GoldenEye 007 has an infamous example of bad escort mission. In this mission, Project Natalia, the AI is so poor that Natalia constantly runs into danger or gets stuck in awkward positions, making it more frustrating than challenging. The mission turns into an exercise in babysitting, with players feeling like they're being punished for the AI's shortcomings. In contrast, The Last of Us handles escort mechanics exceptionally well. Ellie, your companion for much of the game, is competent in combat, often helping by providing supplies or attacking enemies. Her presence feels natural and doesn't hinder the player. The relationship between Joel and Ellie adds emotional weight to the gameplay, and the escort mechanic is seamlessly integrated into the narrative. Boy, do I remember that Natalia AI escort mission. That was frustrating as a kid, because she'd get in the way, she'd be locked into corners, she'd be like doing this in the corner, or like she'd be just run into guys that were shooting at her, and it was so frustrating. And I understand it was the mid-90s. They had not really figured it out yet. I mean, technically you could probably say they haven't figured it out yet either, but games nowadays do a lot better, and either they make the escort mission shorter, or they make them more interesting and necessary feeling, like Last of Us or God of War, the new ones. I will say there are some that just kind of feel weird and tacked on, but I think nowadays we're kind of getting more of a hold of the escort missions. They're not as bad. The only thing I will say is if I have to escort somebody, we move at the same speed or they move faster. That's all I got to say.
But later it fell into the hands of Aziz al-Hazrib, the genius of the occult, and he realized that the heart contained the secret of eternal life.
Exposition is critical for world building, but when done poorly, it can overwhelm the player with too much information all at once, disrupting the narrative flow. Final Fantasy XIII is a prime example of a game that relies heavily on exposition dumps. Much of the game's lore and backstory is buried in long text entries, with little of it conveyed naturally through gameplay or dialogue. Players are expected to pause and read through a glossary of terms to fully understand the story, which disrupts immersion and pacing. On the flip side, Hollow Knight excels at environmental storytelling, where exposition is woven organically into the game world. Instead of dumping lore onto the player through long dialogues or text, the game encourages exploration to uncover its secrets. The history and lore of Hallownest are subtly revealed through character interactions, item descriptions, and environmental clues, creating a rich, immersive narrative that never feels forced. I get it. Games today are just so vast and expansive, and the stories are so huge that it's hard to tell the story in a way that kind of is natural. Some games do it very well, some don't. I mean, you just have to look at AAA games these days that are full of audio logs or textbooks you have to read to get through the entire story, where it used to be you could just tell the story in the game naturally. I use the example of Hollow Knight. Sometimes you don't need to talk as much as show. Sometimes, a lot of times, showing is better than telling. Anyways, thank you for watching. I appreciate you. I love you. I hope you're enjoying the new content that I'm making. It's been a lot of fun. This is more like my old green screen videos, just a little more in depth. So I hope you enjoyed. I love you, and I'll see you in the next video. Subscribe. Bye-bye.